recently I've been getting a lot of questions about sharing my experiences as an immigrant in the United States. And that is something that I believe is worth talking about because a lot of people often aspire to maybe travel or be in a different country for various opportunities or various reasons. And I think it's also important to share some of the struggles that we face as immigrants. If you are an immigrant, you probably will relate to a lot of the things I'll be discussing or talking about in this video. So feel free to chime in. And if I'm missing something, feel free to add to it as well. But it's worth talking about. If you're new here, my name is Steven, and on this channel I talk about finance. And my center of this conversation or this discussion will focus more on just the finance aspect for most part, okay? But I will touch on other areas as well. Now, let's start with the first thing. If you are thinking of moving to a different country, there's so many worries that you do not have to consider ahead of time because you just feel like, well, when you get there, things will work out. You make promises to your family members. You guys have so many plans and dreams and hopes that, once you get there, things will just work out just fine. And as some of you may know, if you've been there, you've done it before. The biggest one that you will be faced with when you move into a new place is, of course, settling down. As we know, you have to worry about where to live. You have to worry about your transportation. Then you have to worry about your medical costs and things that you never really worried about from your home country. So these things will often dictate how much money you can make and how much money you can keep. Because if you live in an expensive area, well, that means you'll be spending a lot of money to your housing cost or maybe transportation costs, and not to talk about medical as well. Then after settling down, after figuring all that out, then you have to then worry about, well, maybe going to school will be the next thing. Unfortunately, a lot of us would come with degrees from various countries with a lot of qualifications, but guess what? Most of those qualifications are not even recognized in this country or in Western world anyway. They are not really recognized, and if they recognize them, you probably have to go take some more certification to really then show that you truly deserve to hold those qualifications, which are not things that you wouldn't think about ahead of time. The next thing we talk about is what we go to get a job, right? Because without those qualifications, you can get a job, and in order to survive and pay your bills, you need to have a job. And this is where a lot of people would often get caught up because sometimes we focus on getting a job first, which I understand. A lot of us will often want to get a job so that we can take care of our immediate needs, which, don't get me wrong, is important. But sometimes these jobs end up being dead-end jobs that will not sustain us over the course of time. They would be enough to take care of the basic things for the moment, but not for the future. And that is why it's often important that you consider going back to school, get some qualifications, and just improve yourself. Now, if you can start a business and the business works great, then that's awesome as well. So that's something that we need to keep in mind, that in order to then get this job, you go to school, then you finally get a job, but then we tend to struggle, okay? Because when it comes to moving up with any job as a foreigner, you will deal with a lot of bias. You will deal with a lot of doubt from your peers and even from people that are giving you this job. So you often have to work twice as hard as, the people that were born in the system. And we talk about racism, right? That is something that you probably deal with as well. You deal with a lot of language barrier, even though you speak English and you think you are able to communicate pretty well. Trust me, the fact that you have an accent will often throw your peers off, your colleagues off, and that tends to put you in a place where you have to then, first of all, get over that language issues before you even before they get to understand you. You know what I mean? So it takes a lot of effort to really overcome that stage as well. And this is in a professional setting, by the way, in the aspect of job. Then, of course, we then move on to finding that financial stability that we dreamed of. Okay, if you think about it, we often want to have this stable life where you have your house, you have your car, and all these other things that would make life better. But during this same phase is also the time you get to see that you are still missing out on some things. Missing out in the sense that your peers are probably moving on. Maybe they're getting married, maybe they're buying houses, maybe they are buying new cars. and you are still in a position where you're just trying to get back on your feet. And the funny thing also is that, which again, if you've experienced this, please feel free to chime in as well. A lot of us would leave our countries to come to the Western world and try to make better for ourselves, right? Or do better for ourselves, only to realize that the people that we left behind are actually doing much better. Isn't that ironic in a way? But that's the truth, because by the time you come here, you initially are set back for maybe a couple of years trying to just catch up to the standard you were or you had in your previous place. For some people, not everyone, okay? There are some exceptions to every case. So you need to understand that. Now, the next thing that happens once you realize that you're behind your peers, of course, you then try to catch up, okay, at this point, whether your peers from back home or your peers even in the country. Now, your peers in the place you're in, say you're in America, for example, you're in Canada, or you're in the UK, your peers that were born in the system may be able to, for example, get loans or use credit that you don't have because you don't have the credit history, or your credit score is not good enough to get, good rate for certain things. And that will lead you to that will hold you back. And that's some of the orders that we end up facing. Now, the other thing to add to this is the pressure then mounts from home as well, because now you've made all these promises, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video. You've made all these promises to your folks back home, hoping that, once you get to Canada or you get to Nigeria, you get to the US, that things will just start to fall in place. But then it's been 2-3 years now, and they haven't heard from you. They haven't really heard from you in the sense that money, right? And you have to start showing that, America is the land of milk and honey, or Canada is the land of milk and honey, wherever you are. So the point here is there's that pressure also that starts to mount. And of course, they've probably made sacrifices for you, and you also want to show up. So you start doing what you're supposed to do, maybe sending money back home. Talking about a car and a house, then you realize you need to buy a house, you need to buy a car, and that's when you get to realize that maybe if you can't beat them, you join them. Like I mentioned in some of my videos in the past, when I first moved here, I never really wanted to get any loans. I never really wanted to get anything on credit, right? But then only for me to realize down the line that without that credit, you can't build a credit score, which means by the time you're ready to buy some of these expensive assets or expensive, maybe a car, you then realize that you can't afford it because, well, if you're going to do it on a loan, your interest is going to be so high because you don't have any credit history. And then your down payments that you have to make for maybe a house will be so high, or for a car will be so high, or even if you're renting. Those are the worries that we end up facing. And these are things that nobody really talks about. Nobody really brings this to your attention. And, well, guess what? I'm talking about it on this channel. Let's move on to the next thing. We talk about what? Unless we focus on staying grounded and keeping ourselves focused on the goal, we would often realize that we would spend years and years going through the motions with nothing to show for it at the end of the day. And that's something that we want to avoid, because you don't want to spend 20 years in a place only to realize that you have nothing to show for it. You want to spend 30 years in a place only for you to realize you have nothing to show for it. And that is the trap that we have to walk against, because in the process of us telling ourselves that if you can't beat them, you join them, then you start getting all these loans, you get all these credit cards and all this stuff, you could end up digging a very big hole for yourself that you can't get out of. And that will put you a lot of years behind. And what will end up happening is you end up working, but then all the money earned ends up going to a bank through loans and interest, right, that you pay. And of course, if you don't put your money in assets, then you have this problem of just buying things that would depreciate. And even if you sell them by the end of the day, you still do not have your money back. You still cannot make your money back. So unless we break that cycle, unless we are determined to build wealth, it won't happen automatically. In fact, the system is designed to make you spend and spend and spend, not to save. And that's why it's important that before we put ourselves in this expensive things that we can't really recoup from, in terms of maybe if it's not something that is an asset that will hold value long time, or if it's not something that is important, that is required, maybe we should think twice before putting our money into it. Because at the end of the day, there is always a goal when in a country like, a Western world where we want to achieve a certain goal, where we want to maybe build financial security and be well and be stable. These are things that we tend to not think about. And that's what I've really shared all through this video. So I hope that this all makes sense. I hope that you found value in this one. I just wanted to share this because of the request that I actually got from someone. And I hope it makes all sense. Again, if you have other things that you want to talk about or you want to share, please feel free to share in the comment section below. I would love to read them, and I'll see you in the next one.